Wall Street Journal editorial board is writing this morning. Coach Obama says his team's big loss wasn't his fault about this back and forth, writing, in the post-election annals of woulda, coulda, shoulda, it will be hard to top departing President Barack Obama's boast that he would have defeated Donald Trump if I had run again. Though Mr. Obama is fond of sports analogies, one he seems not to have noticed is that most coaches after a Super Bowl loss don't blame it on their own quarterback, the diabolical opposition, or the media. His advice to Democrats now is, quote, not thinking that somehow just a great set of progressive policies that we present to the New York Times editorial board will win the day. The serious thought inside Mr. Obama's late hit is whether progressive ideas need revision or merely need to be recycled with a different messenger like him. We doubt all Democrats will be as enthusiastic about running again on the economic and foreign policy record of 2009 to 2016. The argument here, Sam Stein from President Obama, it's not really about my legacy, it's not about my policies, it was about the candidate who lost the election, Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, I mean, this was as much a dig against Clinton as it was Trump from President Obama. And, you know, to a certain extent, you have to say, okay, the Democrats are maybe overanalyzing their loss a tiny bit because they did end up with 2.9 or 2.8 million more votes for their candidate. It was 80,000 votes in 3 states that really cost her. But then on the other hand, you look at the destruction of the Democratic Party under Barack Obama's leadership, and you have to wonder, you know, what was the political, what were the electoral benefits that he gave to the party? He leaves them in a much worse position. The states are decimated. They've lost control of the House and the Senate. The governorships are decimated. So yeah, maybe he is obviously a gifted candidate. He did win election twice by substantial margins. But you know, his legacy as a politician is a bit muddied by all that.
Chris, do you think that part of what's going on here, it's hard to, you know, nail it down authoritatively, but part of what's going on here is the president's instinct, his worry, perhaps better phrased, his worry is that Donald J. Trump, is he up to the moment of being president of the United States? Not just standing with Abe, but, you know, these catastrophic things that occur in this country when a president and only a president can speak to the nation, to calm the nation about things like that.
I think there's very little doubt about that. I mean, when you see this series of statements by the president, I think there are 2 things going on. One is you don't get to be president of the United States without a healthy ego. And so, like every other president, he believes that he did a good job. In fact, he thinks he did a great job on the economy and some other things. But yeah, there is another aspect of this. They could not be more different in the way they approach problem solving. This is a president, and we've seen it. Anybody who works in the White House has seen it, talked to his aides about it. He approaches things in a very professorial, thoughtful, in-depth manner. He is somebody who believes in reading everything, in absorbing a lot of things, and to having that sense of history. And there is a real concern by the president and by the people who surround him that this is not a serious man. This is not someone who considers the larger implications, not just the historic implications, but the larger implications of what's going on in the world right now, and that the shoot from the hip kind of attitude goes against everything Barack Obama has always believed and the way he's performed as a politician and as a president. You
know, it struck me the other day, I was driving through Connecticut and on Route 84, and you pass through Newtown. Yeah. And I was thinking of the President of the United States addressing the nation after that horrific the murders in Newtown of children. And you wonder, your mind wanders and you wonder, is President-elect Donald J. Trump up to that task?
I think that address would have certainly been a lot different, or perhaps less emotional with a President Trump. Sam, I know you've been following up with some of those late deciders in 2016, the voters who waited until the last minute to pick a candidate. For some, it was that October surprise by FBI Director Jim Comey that swayed their choice, but it seems like you found that wasn't the whole story.
Yeah, I mean, we wanted to sort of try and test the theory that Comey was the decisive factor, as the Clinton campaign has argued. And so we solicited reaction from people who decided in the last week who they were going to vote for. And Comey definitely played a role for some of these people, but it wasn't necessarily the determinative role that is being portrayed. There were a lot of sort of random and arbitrary factors that led to people's voting behaviors. For instance, we talked to someone who, you know, assumed that Hillary Clinton would launch a war in the Middle East, and so couldn't wrap his head around voting for her, so voted for Trump. That was a Bernie Sanders supporter. We talked to a person in Florida who was disgusted by both candidates and just decided to vote Republican and write Paul Ryan's name in. But then he did it because he thought that Hillary Clinton had it in the bag. And now that he's reflecting on his election, he said, you know, if I knew now what if I knew then what I know now, I certainly would have voted for Hillary Clinton. You know, other people looked at different factors. Someone was mad at how the media was treating Donald Trump after the Billy Bush tape. They thought they were piling on him, and so that actually he felt empathy for Trump in that moment and was driven towards him. So there's a whole host of random arbitrary things that factor into voter behaviors, and it ended up creating this stew that allowed Donald Trump to be elected.
But as you know, Casey, having spent so much time around the Clinton campaign, they believe with all their hearts that as close as the margins were in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and Michigan, fewer than 80,000 votes determining those states, that Jim Comey was the deciding factor.
They do, and you know, they will also say that, okay, we could have done 1,000 things differently.
Right.
We could have, you know, make one tweak there, put Bernie Sanders on the ticket, spend, you know, 2 more days in Wisconsin, or 2 days at all in Wisconsin. And
I'm not saying they're right. I'm saying this is what they really believe.
right, and it is very much, you are right, and they deeply kind of have internalized this. And I think there is very much a sense of, we were talking about how the president feels about this. The Clinton campaign very much believed that Donald Trump's election would be apocalyptic for the country, for the Democratic Party, and there was, from the very beginning, when it became clear that he was going to be the nominee, a sense that they better not mess it up, because if they did, the consequences were going to be much different than if, say, you know, they were running against Jeb Bush. And the reality is, their mistakes were made, and they lost. And there's been a lot of kind of grappling with what role the campaign may have played in that. I'm not sure. They seem to have settled on Comey as the reason. I'm not convinced it's the only one.
Well, I just want to say Comey was definitely a factor, and you can argue that in an election with 80,000 vote difference in 3 states, that he played a huge role. The bigger point I was trying to get with talking to these voters, why was she in the place where she was vulnerable to that to begin with?
Right.
And there was a whole host of strategic decisions that were made. There were a whole host of outside factors that contributed to this. And for a lot of these late deciding voters, it was an aggregation of that, not a simple Comey decision that ended up affecting how they voted.
Or perhaps if they were spending a bunch of ad money in places like Georgia and Arizona late in the game instead of in Wisconsin.